gets up and starts talking. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Can you all hear me? Mic on? Good evening. It is so wonderful to see all of you all here this evening. All of you all that are joining us here in the audience, and then certainly those that are joining us on live stream, on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. We greet you this evening. I am A. Zachary Faison Jr., the 30th president of Edward Waters College, and now the first president of the Edward Waters University. Yes, that's the my women's volleyball team. Where we are distinctively the state of Florida's destination institution of emerging eminence. And we certainly are delighted to welcome you to this first iteration for the 2022-2023 academic year of our Edward Waters University President's Distinguished Lecture Series, featuring this evening none other than the documentarian and renowned civil rights attorney, Mr. Jeffery Robinson. Give him a round of applause. You will notice that the title of our lecture series is aptly preceded by the two words, stay woke, which we believe to be is a timely colloquialism intended to evince a deliberate focus upon the continuous expansion and development of the overall knowledge base of EWU's entire academic community. The purpose of the series is to also provide a vehicle through which the EWU community can interface intentionally with culturally based issues and to promote socially conscious and socially responsible activism in a millennial and now post-millennial era. Additionally, and equally as important, the series intends to create a platform for the entire EWU community to hear and engage with accomplished and distinctive speakers, to provoke meaningful discussion, reflective and critical thinking, and to provide enriching insight and illumination into the very critical issues of our time. It is my hope that the full collection of distinguished speakers that will visit our academic community tonight, over the course of this academic year and in the forthcoming years, will certainly allow the EWU community to indeed and invariably stay woke by engaging the views, ideas, and ideals espoused and expressed by the national thought leaders, authors, entertainers, activists, advocates, and opinion shapers who will be featured as a part of this series. We hope that you leave tonight inspired, motivated, and maybe even a bit agitated to expand your personal footprint as socially responsible leaders and architects of positive change. Here in the greater Jacksonville community, the state of Florida, our nation, our world, and even beyond as well. At this time, I invite Ms. Chandria Thea, Miss Edward Waters University 2022-2023 will introduce our speaker.
Greetings all. Tonight, this task of introducing our guest of honor and speaker is a great privilege. Jeffery Robinson is a Deputy Legal Director and the Director of the American Civil Liberties Union, also known as the ACLU Trone Center for Justice and Equality, which houses the organization's work on criminal justice, racial justice, and reform issues. Since graduating from Harvard Law School in 1981, Jeffery has 3 decades of experience working on these issues. For 7 years, he represented indigent clients in state court at the Defender Association and then in federal court at the Federal Public Defender's Office, both in Seattle, Washington. In 1988, Jeffery began a 27-year private practice at the Seattle firm of Schroeder, Goldmark, and Bender, where he represented a broad range of clients in local, state, and federal courts on charges ranging from shoplifting to securities fraud and first-degree murder. He has tried over 200 criminal cases to verdict and has tried more than a dozen civil cases representing plaintiffs suing corporate and government entities. Jeffery was one of the original members of the John Adams Project and worked on behalf of one of the 5 men held at Guantanamo Bay charged with carrying out the 9/11 attacks. Jeffery has been listed in Best Lawyers in America since 1993. He has been selected as one of the top 100 Black lawyers in America by Black Enterprise magazine and is an elected fellow of the American College of Trial Lawyers, whose membership is limited to 1% of the attorneys in any state. He is also consistently ranked as one of the top 10 criminal defense lawyers in Washington State by Washington Law and Politics magazine. Jeffery has tried over 200 cases to verdict and represents a broad range of clients facing investigation or prosecution for white-collar crimes and other serious felony charges. In private practice at Schroeder, Goldmark, and Bender since 1988, Jeffery has successfully represented individuals and corporations in state and federal court on charges ranging from first-degree murder to healthcare fraud. He also has extensive experience representing clients in lengthy grand jury investigations that have resulted in no indictment. In addition to being a nationally recognized trial attorney, Jeffery is also a respected teacher of trial advocacy and has lectured on trial skills all over the United States. He is a faculty member of the National Criminal Defense College in Macon, Georgia. He is a past president of the Washington Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers and a winner of that association's prestigious William O. Douglas Award in 2004. It is with great tiger pride and humility that I introduce the guest speaker for this auspicious occasion, Mr. Jeffery Robinson.
because of the faces that I see out there, mainly the students at this school. And I know there are other folks who are not students in the audience, and there's some folks who are watching that are not students, but I commend y'all for being here, and I really appreciate it. I think we are living in very, very, very interesting times. And the thing about history is, if you understand history and you pay attention, you may figure out that we've been here before. If you haven't read this book, you should. Written by George Orwell. And it's not about a year. It's about a system of oppression. And two of the things that George Orwell said in this book are so important, at least in my
This is
view.
computer, so I'm telling him
And
to
they
turn the
go
high
like
end down.
this. Who controls the past controls the future. If you control the narrative of what happened in the past that brings America to the point that we are today and explains why America looks like it looks today. If you control the past in that way, then you control what we're going to do in the future. Because you're controlling the narrative of how we got here, and that will drive what we need to do going forward. And the other thing that Orwell said is, who controls the present controls the past. A government in power in any country, including America, can put out information to inform and misinform their populace that they govern. And sometimes that information has absolutely, positively nothing to do with the truth. So, I came down here, and I know I'm in Florida. What is this critical race theory stuff that people seem to be so concerned about? Well, the laws and the definitions vary significantly from state to state. And the one thing that I would suggest is, if you do a little research, you'll find out that one guy, a conservative in a conservative think tank, came up with this strategy. Let's call everything about educating Americans about the history of Black Americans, let's call it critical race theory, and then we'll say critical race theory is bad and we have to ban all of it. So in Florida, the ban says you have to get rid of all ways of teaching history except for one. That America was the creation of a new nation based largely on universal principles stated in the Declaration of Independence. And they specifically say the 1619 Project and CRT is banned. That's what your state calls it. In Alabama, they say concepts that impute fault, blame, a tendency to oppress others, or the need to feel guilt or anguish solely because of race or sex. So don't make me feel bad about something, because if you do, we can't be teaching that to our children. And you think it's just the South? Wisconsin. No teacher shall be allowed to teach that systems based on meritocracy or traits such as hard work ethic are racist or sexist. How does this translate? If there are people who are not successful economically in America, they just need to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps. That's the only reason they're not economically successful. These folks are desperate to keep folks like you from hearing the truth about our history. And there's a reason for that. So, I left the ACLU 1 year ago, in April of last year, to form the Who We Are project. And this film that was in theaters and is now on Netflix, Who We Are, A Chronicle of Racism in America, is a look at our history of anti-Black racism. And this film would be illegal to show in schools in some states, perhaps including Florida. And I'll tell you at the end of these comments, we got a plan for that, so don't worry about it. But here's your governor with his Stop Woke Act. And I don't know if y'all are aware, or maybe you are, I hope you are, but at the beginning of this month, a federal court ruled that the Stop Woke Act is unconstitutional and it can't go forward. Now, there are going to be appeals that come from that, but The federal judge said that this law discriminates on the basis of viewpoint and is impermissibly vague in violation of the Fourth Amendment. What it means is it discriminates because it's saying one view of history can't be taught, and it's impermissibly vague because nobody knows what the hell they're talking about and what fits in and what doesn't fit in. And that's why you see all kinds of books being banned and you scratch your head and go, what the heck were they thinking? This is nothing new. And that's the point about understanding history. You see something like Governor DeSantis and you think, oh my God, this came out of nowhere. He's some evil genius in the right wing. This is nothing new. It's retread. This guy, John C. Calhoun, was one of the most virulent racists in American history. He was vice president twice, governor of South Carolina, and there was a monument of him that you could see from standing in front of Mother Emanuel Church, where Dylan Roof slaughtered 9 people and injured others. You could stand in front of that church and turn to your left and you could see the John Calhoun monument. This is what he had to say in 1837. The spirit of abolition has taken possession of the pulpit, the schools, and to a considerable extent the press. Listen to this next sentence. The great instruments by which the mind of the rising generation will be formed. What he was saying is, you cannot teach abolition in the schools, because if you do, these kids are going to reject slavery, and we're in trouble. And what he said next is even more frightening, and he was 100% right. Abolition and the Union cannot coexist. We of the South cannot surrender our institutions. He goes on, and he basically says, if you're going to get rid of slavery, you can't do it without drenching the country in blood. This was 23 years before the Civil War started, and he nailed it right on the head. So this effort to prevent our younger generation from understanding the truth about our history is an old method. It is nothing new. This happened just a couple of years ago. Have you all seen this? Throw up your hands if you have. Maybe 1 or 2 people.
White people do what?
They would crack the slaves with the
They would
whip.
do that to slaves.
How do you know? Were you there? Me? Like, how do you know?
Let me help you out with your, okay? Before I kick you out.
How? For what?
You want to have an honest conversation? Let's have an honest conversation. Don't give me the hi, he, ho. Let's have an honest conversation.
Okay.
That's what I want. That's what we're here in AP for.
So he's telling this young man, let's have an honest conversation, because slaves weren't whipped. Enslaved people weren't whipped. They're being taught this for a reason, so that they can then say slavery wasn't that bad as a long time ago. It has no impact on today. Just don't worry about it. Why are y'all still talking about it? This is an 8th history class in this state. And if you think that was bad, how about this one? Remember, enslaved people weren't whipped. I guess he did that to himself. Jacksonville is named for Andrew Jackson. And I want you to know who Andrew Jackson was, because this is an article from 1803 where Andrew Jackson was offering a reward so he could get back a runaway enslaved person that had escaped from him. And when you read it, he's saying this is where he's going to go, this is how he's dressed, this is what he looks like, and at the end, he says, I will give you, so this is like the description where he's going to go. At the end, I'll give you $10 extra for every 100 lashes you will give him, to the amount of 300. So if your arm got tired after 100 lashes, you could still make an extra $10. But if you're willing to switch to the other hand and give another 100 lashes, you could make another $10 on top of the 50 you get for returning the enslaved person. This is who is on the face of our $20 bills.
My God.
This is who Andrew Jackson was, not someone else. This is who he was. One more time, back to class.
If I call somebody the N-word, what am I calling them?
The N-word?
No. Ignorant. Yeah, ignorant. The N-word just means ignorant. It doesn't have any other meaning and any other vocabulary other than you are a stupid person. You are ignorant. You are not well read. You are not well educated. That's what it means. I laugh because on the Florida way down here where we came up with the term Florida cracker. Well, everyone thinks Florida crackers like racist. What's
Yeah, you go, wow. I think all of us in this room know exactly what the N-word means. This is how you educate a population to believe that there is no history of anti-black racism in this country. It's just all overstated. It's all people being too sensitive. Let me go real quickly to critical race theory, because defining what it is differs from claiming what it does. Defining what it is. It's a law school academic framework that was come up with by several people. It says that racism isn't just personal. It's in every part and structure of our society, and that people often unconsciously participate in systems that are racist, even if they don't intend to. That's just a kind of grade school, 6th grade summary of what critical race theory is. It is a law school course. So you might be asking yourself, how come parents of 4th graders are screaming at school boards not to teach their 4th graders a class that they can't get until law school? That should tell you that there's something different going on. It's claiming what critical race theory does. It endorses segregation and stereotyping. It denounces the U.S. as a racist country. It's a mechanism to shame, humiliate, and guilt people associated with racism. Shame, humiliate, and guilt people associated with racism or sexism, translated, white males, which causes them emotional distress. My God, if you start making white men uncomfortable in America, what's going to happen to our democracy? That's what these laws are about. There's nothing wrong with critical race theory. The question is, how come some white people feel guilt and shame and humiliation upon hearing about our history? That's the interesting question. This next thing is going to be triggering, but I'm trying to make a point. The next person you're going to hear is a Republican strategist who worked for Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan. And this is all about this thing about history and teaching false history. You call things something that they're not. Listen to what he has to say, and listen to him tell this group of reporters, now y'all don't quote me on this.
Here's how I would approach that issue as a statistician or a political scientist, or no, as a psychologist, which I'm not, is how abstract you handle the racism. In other words, you start out, and now y'all don't quote me. You start out in 1954 by saying nigger, nigger, nigger. By 1968, you can't say nigger, that hurts your backfire, so you say stuff like forced busing, states' rights, and all that stuff. And you get so abstract now, you're talking about cutting taxes, and all of these things you're talking about are totally economic things, and the byproduct of them is blacks get hurt worse than white. And subconsciously, maybe that is part of it. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that if it is getting that abstract and that coded, that we're doing away with the racial problem one way or the other. You follow me? Because obviously sitting around saying, we want to cut taxes, we want to cut this, and we want, is much more abstract than even the busing thing. And a hell of a lot more abstract than Never Living, you know. So any way you look at it, race is coming on the back burner.
This strategy ain't new. Call it something else. And that way you can hide your true intent. This is as American as apple pie and as old as the apple pie tradition. And that's why it's important to understand we have seen these things before. Don't think that you're going through something in this country that is radically new. It is radical, and we are at a critical tipping point, but we have been here before. And so, is there a thing, a racial thing, that makes human beings, when I'm saying racial now, I mean the human race, that makes human beings behave in a very important way? And I want to suggest to you that there is. And in 1976, there was a group called Steely Dan, and they wrote a song called The Caves of Altamira. And these caves have drawings that are 20,000 years old. And most historians agree that the Sumerians were the first culture to use the written language widely anyway, to use written language. And that was about 5,000 years ago. So 15,000 years before human beings were using written language, they were drawing this stuff on cave walls to tell the minds of the rising generation the story of how the world works. Human beings are hardwired. When we think we're doing something important, we write stuff down. And so you don't have to listen to the governor of your state explain to you something about history. You can go to the people who lived it. White supremacy and the Constitution. They didn't have the internet because Al Gore apparently hadn't invented it yet when they had the Constitutional Convention, so people had to do things the old-fashioned way. They wrote letters. And you can go to state historical societies and find the letters that our founders wrote. If you see the film Who We Are, you'll see that some of it is filmed in a theater, Town Hall Theater in New York City. We didn't use all of the stuff we filmed in Town Hall in the movie. What you're about to see are actors reading parts of letters from the founders of our country, telling you what they were concerned about.
May Congress not say that every black man must fight. Did we not see a little of this the last war? We were not so hard pushed as to make emancipation general, but acts of assembly passed that every slave who will go to the army should be free. In this situation, I see a great deal of the property of the people of Virginia in jeopardy, and their peace and tranquility gone.
You may say, why are we going back this far if we're talking about Confederate monuments? Because if you don't understand the past, you will not understand the present or the future. If you wonder, why have Confederate monuments hung on for so long? Why are people so desperate about keeping them? It's because these attitudes are older than the constitutional form of our country. And you'll see that a little bit later when we talk just briefly about the colonial history of the state of Virginia. That's Patrick Henry. Give me liberty or give me death. He's saying, are these enslaved people going to be, freed? Because we ain't down for that in Virginia. Here's how James Madison responded, the father of the Constitution.
I was struck with surprise when I heard Patrick Henry express himself. When alarmed with respect to the emancipation of slaves, there is no power to warrant it in that paper, the Constitution, if there be. I know it not.
Patrick Henry wasn't finished.
In this state, there are 236,000 blacks. There are many more in several other states, but there are few or none in the northern states. if there should happen to be an insurrection of slaves, the country cannot said to be invaded. They cannot, therefore, suppress it without the interposition of Congress. Congress, and Congress only under this new Constitution can call forth the militia.
Translated real quickly, what happens if these black people decide they don't want to be enslaved anymore? We need guns. And when I come back another time, we'll have a discussion about the Second Amendment and one of the purposes of the Second Amendment. I'm not saying it's the only purpose, but one of the purpose of the Second Amendment was to answer Patrick Henry's concerns.
The militia may be here destroyed by that method which has been practiced in other parts of the world before, by disarming them. Congress has an exclusive right to arm them under this proposed Constitution.
These are the seeds of the Civil War, because what they're talking about is if enslaved people are starting to get the idea that they're going to be free, we are taking guns and we are going to put them down. And these seeds were being sowed even when the Constitution was being written.
We have security that the general government can never emancipate them, for no such authority is granted, and it is admitted on all hands that the general government has no powers but what are expressly granted by the Constitution.
Our people were never intended to be free in this country in the minds of those who founded the country. Were there people who disagreed? Of course they did. But they had this disagreement and they talked about it. Here's what they did. Article 1, Section 2, the 3/5 clause. Most people think that's just an expression of us being less than a whole human being. And it was an expression of that. It was an expression of something much more drastic. Article 1, Section 9, no ban on the transatlantic slave trade until 1808. And you see they said such persons because they didn't want to use the term slave in the Constitution. And what this is saying is we need to keep sending ships to Africa to get these enslaved people because we're getting rich off of it. So let's have the Constitution ensure that no state can stop it for at least another 20 years. Article 2, Section 1 is the Electoral College. Remember what Patrick Henry said? 236,000 blacks in Virginia. Multiply 236,000 by 3/5, and you still get a really big number. And what did that number do? It added to the population of Virginia, and that's how they decided how many Congress people you got and how many votes in the Electoral College you got. Article 4 of the Constitution said if any of our ancestors got free, the law required them to be turned over immediately. So if you're wondering why there has always been this historical animosity between police departments and black communities across America, in the document that founded our country, our attempts at freedom were literally unconstitutional. And just in case you think this wasn't that serious, Article 5 says, you know what? What if somebody tries to amend the Constitution and get rid of Article 1, Section 9, the thing that's going to let us keep getting enslaved people from Africa? So in Article 5, they said, you can't change Article 1, Section 9 until 1808. This is how deep-seated it was. And this is what slavery was. When you build a ship and you look at the dynamics of how much cargo you can carry, you end up treating human beings like logs. You already saw this picture. And to end this trio, this book is about slave breeding industry in America. Because few people know that in two major places, Richmond, Virginia, and on the Maryland Eastern Shore, there were breeding farms where black women were taken and they were bred so that they could have children that could continue Americans' cotton production. I am telling you this because when we talk about the monuments, I want you to understand what the Civil War was about and what these monuments are honoring. This is what slavery was. And by the eve of the Civil War, cotton production was 2.3 billion pounds a year. Have any of y'all ever held a piece of cotton in your hand?
My
Can I
God.
see a show of hands? How much does it weigh?
Barely.
Nothing? How much of that do you think you had to pick to get to 2.3 billion pounds of it?
About 4 Stanley nickels.
What you had to do was have 4 million enslaved people in America. The value of enslaved people in 1860, $3.5 billion, about $100 billion in today's money. And Mississippi, Tennessee, and Louisiana were the richest parts of America. And if you look at that area now, it's one of the poorest parts of America because they don't have enforced enslaved labor anymore. And enslaved people were more than just the free labor because they were bought and sold. That means they were taxed, and you could take out mortgages and you could get loans. And so all these things were just into the normal flow of business in America. So what was the primary reason for the Civil War? Because I want to come back to monuments. Well, why not go back to the people that fought it and ask them why they did it? The Vice President of the Confederacy. Our new government is founded upon the great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man, that slavery's subordination to the superior race is his natural and normal condition. Can he say it any more clearly? In all non-slaveholding states, the people have formed themselves into a great sectional party, now strong enough in numbers to control the affairs of each of those states. Listen to this, please. Based on the unnatural feeling of hostility to the southern states and their beneficent and patriarchal system of African slavery, proclaiming the debasing of equality of all men, irrespective of race or color. They call that a debasing doctrine. So if you're wondering why Texas went into the Civil War, they are telling you it's because we ain't giving up these enslaved people. Here's what Mississippi had to say.
Our position is thoroughly identified with the institution of slavery, the greatest material interest of the world. A blow at slavery is a blow at commerce and civilization.
Mississippi had one other thing to say. We have a choice. We must either submit to degradation and the loss of property worth $4 billion of money, or we must secede from the Union. And they weren't giving up that money, so they left the Union.
The election of Lincoln cannot be regarded otherwise than a solemn declaration on the part of a great majority of the Northern people of hostility to the South, of her property and her institutions.
For the last 10 years, we have had numerous and serious causes of complaint against our non-slaving, slave-holding Confederate states with reference to the subject of African slavery. They have endeavored to weaken our security, to disturb our domestic peace and tranquility, and persistently refuse to comply with their express constitutional obligations to us in reference to that property.
Sounds all flowery, but what he's saying is, I remember the Constitutional Convention. Y'all said we could keep the enslaved people, and now you're taking them away from us. You lied, and we're leaving the Union. And Georgia was right. They were lied to, because they were told they could keep people as enslaved people. Louisiana. The people of the slaveholding states are bound together by the same determination and necessity to preserve African slavery. And Virginia, having declared that the powers granted them under this Constitution from the people, and that they should be resumed if those powers were perverted to their injury and oppression. And they're saying, you perverted those powers to oppress the southern slaveholding states. Every state made it clear there is one reason the Civil War is happening, because of slavery. And we are willing to maim and murder American soldiers in defense of that slavery. So what about Florida? Well, it took a little bit of looking, because y'all did a lot of things down here when you withdrew from the Union. In January of 1861, there was a committee that was appointed to draft a resolution like the other states had. And then what you find out looking at the documents is by March of 1861, they were discharged, but there was no document to be found. And so there were some researchers down here who started looking. And what they found was an undated, untitled, and unedited draft of the Florida Declaration of Causes for leaving the Union at the beginning of the Civil War. And they literally found it in a series of documents, in a carton, in a folder. And we're going to talk about what Florida had to say, because you will recognize it as being completely consistent with what the other states were saying. So when were most of these Confederate monuments built? The ones here and the ones across the country? Well, you might be surprised, because it wasn't right after the Civil War. And you think, a war is over, people are emotional, that's when they're going to build monuments. Well, what you can see, I think, is that, hopefully you can see it on this chart, but I'll just help you. Right here is 1896, when Plessy versus Ferguson was decided. Separate but equal is the law of the land. And that's how many monuments have been built. You know when they were really built? Look at that. Between 1896 and 1923. And the next big spike in building the monuments was during the Civil Rights Movement. This is when the Confederate monuments were built. And you have to ask yourselves, what else was going on in America at this time? What was the culture saying about Black Americans? Well, massacres of Black people, Wilmington, North Carolina, Atlanta, Springfield, Illinois, Slocum, Texas, East St. Louis, Elaine, Arkansas, Washington, D.C., Springfield, Illinois, Chicago, Illinois. Y'all help me with the pronunciation of this city. Ocoee, Florida, Tulsa, Oklahoma, and Rosewood, Florida. Massacres where Black people were murdered in large numbers and nobody was arrested. This is when these monuments are being built. And this is during a time when there were 4,000, between 1877 and 1950, Brian Stevenson's organization, EJI, documented more than 4,000 racial terror lynchings during this time period. And when you go from 1877 to 1950, that's, what is it, 73 years or something like that? Understand that that means that they were lynching Black Americans almost at the rate of one every week for almost 70 years. And this time period when these monuments were built were right in the middle of it. Here's just an example, a guy named John Pelham. This monument has since been taken down. But why'd they build him a monument? Well, he left West Point in 1861 to join the Confederate Army. And here's what they said about why they gave him a monument. He displayed a genius for dashing to a spot that commanded the battlefield and bravely raining shot and canisters on horses that greatly outnumbered his own. Translated, He maimed and murdered a whole lot of American soldiers in defense of slavery, and they built a monument to him for that. Not for something else, but for that. In 1915, William Joseph Simmons went to Stone Mountain, Georgia. He took bricks to make an altar, a Holy Bible, an American flag, an unsheathed sword, and a burning cross, and he reinstituted the KKK. This is Stone Mountain, Georgia, the largest bas relief in the world. The United Daughters of the Confederacy came up with the idea, and the KKK helped them start working on it.
Wow.
And they ran out of money, but don't worry, the state of Georgia stepped in and spent taxpayer money, including money that came from the descendants of enslaved people, to finish this monument. And it was completed in 1972, 4 years after King is assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee. This is a clip from the film, and I'm going to show it to you because it involves a discussion that I had with a gentleman in South Carolina about the meaning of the Confederate flag. So, just a few minutes, give this a look.
Slavery had nothing to do with the war. That was not the cause of the southern states seceding. That was not the cause of the first shot being fired on that fort over there. It was about money. And it was not about slavery. It was about moral tariffs. It was about more money. Lincoln wanted to impose 45% more taxes on the southern states.
Taxes on the goods the southern states were producing. And those goods were essentially cotton, tobacco, and rice.
Predominantly.
And those goods were produced by slave labor. All of it. Isn't that right?
I mean,
95% of it? Isn't that right? If it's 95% produced by slave labor, enslaved people, and the North is saying, we're going to tax you on that because we want some of that money. And the South is saying, no, wait a minute, we're the ones producing it, so you shouldn't be taking the money. That money wouldn't exist without slave labor. I mean, that did affect the bottom line. Wouldn't you agree with that?
They chose to stay. In most cases in the South, that's the way it worked, because they were treated as family. And they knew what they had, didn't know what they were being faced with if they left.
So your view is that enslaved people were treated as family? Then why wouldn't it be all right for me to own you as long as I treated you like family?
If that's the way economics work.
Would you be satisfied with that?
In today's world.
In any world?
In today's time.
In any time. So was slavery evil?
Yeah. I'm not denying that.
People have said that this man has actually contacted us since the film came out. And one of the things he has said is that I appear like I'm a racist, and I don't like that. Because if I saw a KKK member carrying a Confederate flag, I would want to beat them up. He is so convinced that that flag has nothing to do with the Civil War. But here is what the state of South Carolina said. They went to war because of the election of a man to the high office of president whose opinions and purposes are hostile to slavery. People are afraid of dealing with the truth because the truth has implications. And let me just do and get rid of the flag for a minute real quickly. William T. Thompson is a guy that designed one of the Confederate flags. And he has this incredibly racist statement about why he designed the flag. And Southerners all like to say, yeah, but there were a lot of Confederate flags, and that's the one Thompson designed. But see, there were these, like this one, and this one, and this is the battle flag of Northern Virginia. Well, you remember what Virginia said, right? About the reason they went to war. It was about slavery. And in colonial times, here's what Virginia did. They passed a law saying children of enslaved mothers are also enslaved. Why did they need that law? Because white masters were raping black women, and the law wanted to be clear in case those babies came out with freckles or blue eyes. Don't go thinking that's a person. That's an enslaved person. If enslaved people became Christian in Virginia, the law says they're not free. And you know, it's difficult because if I tell you that Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior, don't you kind of have to treat me like a human being if you're a Christian? But the law said, don't worry about that, because the only way an enslaved person could become a Christian would be by the charity and piety of their owner. If an enslaved person was resisting a master and got killed, the master wouldn't be charged with a felony. And I like to say, take the last 15 years and look at the number of unarmed black people and other people of color that have been killed by police with no consequences. It's still not a felony. And from 1689 to 1865, Virginia enacted more than 130 quote-unquote slave statutes. So these are the people that decided to go to war, not for any other reason, but for this reason. And that's why this freaking monument is a big problem. The one right here in Jacksonville. And what they say is, it's an honor in the memory of the women of the Southland. Let this mute but eloquent structure speak to generations to come of a generation of the past. Let it repeat perpetually the imperishable story of our women of the 60s, meaning the 1860s. Those noble women who sacrificed all upon their country's altar. This woman reading to the two children, the one little girl looking directly at you, what do you think she was reading to them? And what excuse do you think she gave about why Daddy and her uncles and her older brothers were out fighting a war? They were heroes, not people defending slavery. That's the history that they were taught, and that's why this monument was built. Well, that Florida draft statement, that gives you a little hint into what she may have been teaching her children. Because here's what that draft statement had to say. And I acknowledge this was a draft. It's not the final statement. But you'll see what they were thinking. We have not acted in haste or in passion, but with the utmost deliberation and from what we regard as immeasurable necessity. Laws that are clearly constitutional, where the question has been presented for adjudication. I'm just reading this quickly, but what this second paragraph says is, our laws allowing slavery are constitutional, and y'all are trying to overturn them. You are showing an open disregard of constitutional obligation and of the rights and interests of the slave-holding states, and of a deep and inveritable hostility to the people of these states. Y'all don't like us owning slaves, and we're really upset about that. The congressional halls have been prostituted to the daily denunciation and vituperation of the slave-holding states. Prostituted because they're complaining about the slave-holding states, and thus subjecting members of the states to the degradation of gross and constantly repeated insults. Does this sound familiar? Your law about you can't make white people feel guilty about something? They're saying the same thing here in Florida in 1860. That's why I'm telling you, if you control the past, you control the future. And by knowing our past, you figure out this stuff is not new. It is not new. A A large proportion of the members of the non-slaveholding states have written books and have published and circulated amongst us the direct tendency and avowed purpose to excite insurrection and servile war, meaning preaching that slavery is wrong and enslaved people should try and get free. But they were concerned about the enslaved people too. The slaves, from their rapid increase, which is the highest evidence of the humanity of their owners, will become valueless. Nothing is more certain than this, and in no distant day. What must be the condition of the slaves themselves when their numbers become so large that their labor will be of no value to their owners? Their natural tendency, everywhere shown where the race has existed, to idleness, vagrancy, and crime, our natural tendency to those things will be increased. This is what Florida was saying about why they were willing to go to war. And when you look at the history of this monument, the man who built it said, to honor a god, what the Greeks would do was make a statue and build a temple around it. And after talking to the people here in Jacksonville, that's what they wanted, to memorialize this. In 1909, they started planning. May 6th through the 8th of 1914, thousands of elderly Confederate veterans camped in parks around here to talk about this monument. And those elderly Confederate veterans were the ones who were murdering and maiming American soldiers in defense of slavery. And they wanted monuments to what they did because they saw it as heroic. October 15, 2014, what had been called Deegan Park was renamed Confederate Park. And on October 26, 2015, there was the formal dedication of that monument with a huge parade and a large Confederate flag. There's the monument, and they're telling you as clearly as they can, this is for what these women did between 1861 and 1865. So it ain't for anything else. This is how it ends. It is in so many words saying to you, we will not burn you at the stake, but we will torture you to death by a slow fire.
Wow.
We will not confiscate your property and consign you to a residence and an equality with the African, but that destiny certainly awaits your children.
Sheesh.
That's what the state of Florida was writing, representatives of the state, about why they went to the Civil War. And that's what those children are being taught by the woman in this monument. And that is what the monument was built to honor. That, not something else, but that. Very quickly, this politician expressed an admiration for the way Americans had gunned down the millions of Redskins to a few 100,000 and now keep the modest remnant under observation in a cage. This is who said that. Adolf Hitler. And in this book, published in 2018, Hitler's American Model, it demonstrates how the Nuremberg laws, a group of the most racist pieces of legislation in history, the Nuremberg laws were based on American Jim Crow laws.
Wow.
That's a kick in the gut if you start thinking about that. So, quickly, where are these monuments? That's where they are.
Sheesh.
The top 10 states, y'all are definitely in it. And just in case you're wondering, Those are those same states and the number of documented lynchings they had in those states between 1877 and 1950. All of this is tied together in terms of the truth about our history, the truth about why there was a civil war, the truth about what was behind it, and the truth about these monuments. And people are desperate to keep the monuments, so they have to lie about what they mean. But they can't lie effectively if you arm yourselves with the truth. Not with weapons, but with the truth. Four black men who have a podcast saw the film, and they were talking about that conversation with Braxton Spivey, the guy from South Carolina with the flag. And what they said is, and I had never thought of it this way, but they said, people like that need our outrage and our yelling to hide their ignorance. And I think when I showed up, Spivey thought, I'm gonna say some stuff, and this guy's gonna yell and scream at me, and I'll smirk and smile, and he'll lose control, and that's not what happened. And it didn't go the way he thought it was gonna go. If you arm yourself with these facts, and someone gives you some, pardon my French, bullshit about one of these topics, you can say to them in a calm, rational way, let me give you 5 reasons why you're wrong, and let's come back and talk about it again.
I would tell you that Robert E. Lee was an honorable man. He was a man that gave up his country to fight for his state, which in 150 years ago was more important than country. The lack of an ability to compromise led to the Civil War. And men and women of good faith on both sides made their stand where their conscience had them make their stand.
Heard stuff like that before? It's about the lost cause. Men and women of good conscience on both sides. And the lack of an ability to compromise was what led to the Civil War. How about the 3/5 compromise in the Constitution? How about the compromise about having 1808 as the cutoff of the international slave trade, which I think I didn't make clear, but that wasn't about morality. That was about the domestic slave traders that were breeding black women, saying y'all are driving down our prices. So we need to cut off that international stuff and just do this domestically. How about those two compromises? How about the 1820 Missouri Compromise? How about the 1850 Missouri Compromise? How about the 1854 Kansas-Nebraska Act? America was always willing to compromise about the conditions under which black people would be enslaved. This is a general, a retired general in the United States Army saying, pardon my French for the second time tonight, some bullshit. Some stuff that is absolutely not true and defensible. And I found the best response to this that I have ever seen, and it was done more than a century ago, or almost a century ago, by W.E.B. Du Bois. And here's what he had to say.
People do not go to war for abstract theories of government. They fight for property and privilege. And that was what Virginia fought for in the Civil War. And Lee followed Virginia. He followed Virginia not because he particularly loved slavery, although he certainly did not hate it, but because he did not have the moral courage to stand against his family and his clan. It is the punishment of the South that Robert Lee's and Jefferson Davises will always be tall, handsome, and well-born. That their courage will be physical, not moral. That their leadership will be weak compliance with public opinion and never costly and unswerving revolt for justice and right. It is ridiculous to seek to excuse Robert Lee. Either he knew what slavery meant when he helped maim and murder thousands in his defense, or he did not. If he did not, he was a fool. If he did, Robert Lee was a traitor and a rebel, not just to his country, but to humanity and humanity's God.
So that's one way to look at Robert E. Lee. I'm about to end, and I'm going to gauge because I've got something that's going to take about 5 minutes to show you. And I think I'm going to do it because what you're about to see is an accomplishment by a woman named Tammy Sawyer. She was a county council person in Shelby County, Tennessee, which is Memphis. And she was, are there any seniors in here? Okay, she was about your age when she started doing what she was doing, maybe a little bit older. But this is Tammy Sawyer from Memphis, Tennessee.
What's up, y'all? Tammy Sawyer here. I'm live at the Nathan Bedford Forrest statue right here in Memphis, Tennessee. I just wanted to come down and let Nathan Bedford Forrest know that he has a formidable opponent. I was asked, what's one thing you think you could make happen in a year? I said, we can get these damn statues removed. And I didn't believe it, but I said, that sounds like one thing we could do. And I went on Facebook and I made a post and said, who wants to talk about these statues? And the next thing you know, we had filled Bruce Elementary Gym with 350 Memphians of all ages, races, genders, sexualities, creeds, even a descendant of Nathan Bedford Forrest himself, who came together to say, we want Nathan Bedford Forrest and Jefferson Davis and all Confederate memorabilia removed from our city.
How do you respond to the people that say this isn't about slavery or oppression of black people, this is about Southern culture and Southern history and maintaining our history?
I think that those people need to, one, learn history. When people talk about Southerners, they think about white people. But the economy of the South and the culture of the South was built off slavery. The food we eat, right? Fried chicken, ham hocks, collard greens, that's black people. The music we listen to. Elvis is not Elvis without black musicians, right? Martin Luther King was killed here, right? Blackness, the blood of black people seeps so deeply into the ground of the South. You cannot describe Southerners or Southern history or American history with the exclusion of black people. And so the people who say that we're rewriting history, they rewrote history. Now, if we had a statue that says, here lies the graves of a notorious slave owner and his wife, who only became one of the richest people in Memphis because of his brutal practices towards black Americans. But that's not the history that people are ready to reconcile. And I see our black kids, their lights go out in their eyes at 3, 4, 5 years old. They believe they're lesser than by the time they've reached kindergarten. And if we can change anything, I believe we could change the landscape of our city so they didn't have to be reminded on a daily basis that they are considered second-class citizens by many people in this country.
History is being made in Memphis tonight. Within the next few hours, both the Nathan Bedford Forrest and Jefferson Davis statues will no longer stand in our city.
While we watched the cranes come in, the park get filled with workers, and I was right across the street to witness at 9:01 on December 20th, 2017, Nathan Bedford Forrest rise above that pedestal for the first time since he was placed.
What was that feeling?
It's a complicated feeling, one of relief, one of joy, and one of sadness.
Where was the sadness from?
We had to fight so hard
right? Like, that I had friends who went to jail for this, that a woman was killed for this, right? And that our statue came down and almost another 1,000 stand across the country. And that people are working harder to protect them and tell us that we are wrong or attention seekers than they are to reconcile and get to a point of truth and understanding about who these people were.
That's what Tammy Sawyer did. And remember I told you about John C. Calhoun and that monument in South Carolina? It's not there anymore because they had it taken down as well. 50 years from now, your children and maybe your grandchildren are going to be asking you, when the country looked like it was going crazy, what did you do? Think about the answer that you're going to have for them. And think about that answer as you consider things like, I don't know, whether you're going to vote in November if you're eligible. Because your rights depend on what happens next. Tipping points in a country like America take longer than a moment. George Floyd's murder wasn't a tipping point. It was something that happened hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times before. This time somebody just happened to capture it on a video camera. That's the difference. And if you don't know your history, you can look at what happened to George Floyd, as horrific as it was, and say, oh my God, this is something new. And you would be wrong. And so understanding our history makes us armed to have intelligent conversations about what we do next. If y'all have any questions, I'd love to try and answer them, but thank you for listening me through a long, long presentation. I really appreciate it.
Testing? Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. That was an incredible lecture, as we do. It would be. What y'all think about that? All right, Mr. Robinson has agreed to stick around and answer some questions. I am here to facilitate our question and answer period. Good evening to you all. My name is Dr. Tamika Hobbs, and I have the privilege of serving as the Executive Director of the newly established Randolph Institute for Law, Race, Social Justice, and Economic Policy, which is one of the co-presenters of this program. So it's my pleasure to be with you. I would like to invite you at this time, if you have questions, thank you. I was not looking back there. If you have questions, there's a microphone on this side. I will return to this side, but we ask you to come forward at the aisle so that you get engaged with Mr. Robinson. It's not often that we have these opportunities, but we do invite you to come forward. So please go ahead and take a moment. While you are contemplating and getting in front of the microphones, I want to get us started. Mr. Robinson, I really love what you left us with, this idea of taking up our arms, right? And arming ourselves, not with firearms, but with knowledge. I wanted to ask you if, as we take up your challenge to arm ourselves, what readings, what activities, what should we be absorbing? Starting, of course, with your wonderful documentary, and if you haven't seen it, you just got a taste of it. You definitely need to take that in. But aside from that, what recommended readings or other resources would you recommend?
Anything that Ibram X. Kendi has written, you should read. Anything that Kimberly Crenshaw has written. She is one of the founders of the so-called critical race theory. If you come to the Who We Are website, we have a list of resources, of things you can read, because part of our goal is, there's a lot of stuff that we are doing, but part of our goal is to tell you, if you're looking for information on this topic, go to this group, or go to this person, because this effort is big. It is bigger than any one person or any one organization. There's a lot of stuff that I know about this, but there is much, much more that I don't know. But at least I know who I can go to find out. So come to our website, look at the resources there, and when you go to those resources, it's going to send you to other places. And quite frankly, this is how I started doing this research. I didn't just I did kind of fall into it because of some family issues, but I started looking and I found one thing and it would lead me to two things, which would lead me to five things, which would lead me to something else, and which would take me somewhere else. And as a criminal defense lawyer, you are trained, if you have an incredibly complicated set of facts, put them into a timeline and see what happens. And when I did that, the top of my head came off.
Thank you for that. And did you give your website to make sure everybody has it? If not, if you go to our Stay Woke
I think
page.
it's maybe on the screen right
Okay,
now.
Fantastic, thank you. I just want to point out that Ibram X. Kendi is a graduate of an HBCU, graduated from Florida A&M University, and President Faison, previously for one of our shared reading experiences, lifted up the book, Stand from the Beginning by Ibram X. Kendi. There are still copies available. If you would be interested, please let me know afterwards, and we'll make sure that those are made available to you. So, heard it from Mr. Robinson, recommended reading, we have those available for you. We have a question.
Good evening. Thank you for speaking with us today. I am Amari Leaf, a senior communications scholar here at Edward Waters University, and I humbly serve as your Mr. Edward Waters University. And my question for you would be, in a country that's fundamentally built off of hate, do you believe that African Americans will ever truly experience freedom?
Here's my answer. I don't know. It's uncertain. We don't have enough information yet. And here's why I'll say that. I turned 66 in August. Now, I'm going to forgive y'all for not going, oh no, you couldn't be that old, you look much younger. There was no response whatsoever. I forgive you. I forgive you. It's all right.
Silent. You can hear rap this on cotton.
I would challenge and ask the other folks of a certain age in this room whether they might agree with this statement. There were people who came before us who fought on issues of racial justice. Make no mistake about it. But the depth of the conversations, the depth of the research, it has never been like this before. Not in my lifetime. And I didn't read about the civil rights movement. I was born and raised in Memphis, Tennessee in 1956. So I grew up in the middle of it. It's what I walked into when I walked out the door of my house every day. And the conversations that were going on around America were nowhere near as widespread as they are today. And if you wonder whether there is a chance for America to take like a radical step in the right direction, look at the desperation of the people that don't want that to happen. Look at January 6th, 2020. Those people were desperate. Look at fourth grade parents screaming about teaching their children something that they can't be taught unless they get out of high school, college, and get into law school. That's desperation. Look at these laws saying, don't make white people uncomfortable because that's un-American and so we can't have that. If you're wondering whether America could go in the right direction, there are a whole lot of people who are afraid that's what's about to happen. And their reaction is part of what tells me that yes, there is a chance, but I'm not Pollyannish. We have been, if you see the film, you will see that in my personal view, America has been at tipping points on racial justice on 3 prior occasions. Once when the country was formed, when it went from colonial to constitutional. And all that talk about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness and freedom was on the table, but the money that the slaves were worth was also on the table, and America doubled down and said, forget this, we are keeping these slaves. That was the first tipping point. After the Civil War, Reconstruction was working. There were 2,000 black men that served in elected office during Reconstruction. 700,000 black men registered to vote before the 15th Amendment. But the North took the troops out of the South, and the Confederates regrouped into organizations like the KKK, and we saw black codes and Jim Crow, and then the Supreme Court said separate but equal. And so people tend to forget, for 90 years after the end of Civil War, separate but equal was the law of America. That was the second tipping point. Reconstruction was working, and we rolled back. And then there was the one that I lived through in the 60s. Because I'll tell you, at 11 years old, I saw the Civil Rights Act get passed, the Voting Rights Act get passed. I saw my parents take us into white restaurants where we had never been before and have people have to serve us. And while that seems insignificant today, and in fact, even King himself said before he died, a lot of the gains we got in the first 12 years of the Civil Rights Movement were kind of bargain gains, because it didn't cost America anything to give the right to vote or to integrate schools or public accommodations. Now to address a whole lot of issues that cost America something. We were at a tipping point in '68 when King got shot, and I think the country rolled back after that. In fact, I know it did, because what came next was Richard Nixon and the war on drugs. We are at a tipping point again right now. When I did this film, the theater part of it was in Town Hall Theater in New York on Juneteenth, 2018. And I said we were at a tipping point then. And I believe we are at the same tipping point right now. Tipping points in a country with a 400-year history don't last for a minute or a moment or an event. They can be a decade or two. And that's why I'm addressing this group of people. Because essentially what I'm saying is, this is going to be on y'all's backs. There are a whole lot of people like me who are going to be out there fighting with you. But you and your children are the ones who are going to live with the decisions about the direction that this country goes in the next 10 years. So if you have ever thought that this might be a time where you would get more engaged, I would say that's a really good decision.
Thank you.
At this time, are there any other questions? Any more questions at all from the audience? Any more questions? I'm going to ask this just last question before we close. Can you just talk a little bit about to these young people just why it's so important to vote? I mean, they hear that all the time, vote, 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 vote. But why is that just so critically important for particularly young people to get engaged in their civic duty of voting?
I think once again, in any contest of political will, you're gauging what you can do, you're gauging what those people who are fighting against you can do, and each is reacting to the other. If we had more time, I'm teaching a law school class at Boston College University this semester, and on the day we did voting, the first thing I did was to have all of these law students take a 1964 Louisiana literacy test. And they all failed it. And you would too, because it has nothing to do with intelligence and certainly nothing to do with your ability to vote. All kinds of things like that are what caused the Voting Rights Act to be passed in 1965. And what that law said is, for certain states, most of the southern states, if you're going to pass a law impacting people's ability to vote, you have to get it approved first. Since 1965 until 2010, there were probably 4,000 to 5,000 laws that were blocked because the southern states have always been interested in restricting our right to vote. So why is that? Why is it that people are spending thousands, hell, millions of dollars to fight back on Amendment 4 in this state? That would have put 1 million people back on the voter rolls. A whole lot of them people from our community. Why do you think people are afraid of that? Because people know that voting makes a difference. What you will see, and I can't show it to you tonight, but in the first week of October, keep your eyes open. The Who We Are Project is going to release a second documentary. This one very, very short, about 6 minutes long. It's going to be narrated by Tom Hanks, who actually paid for the whole thing. And it's about the presidential election of 1876. If you think the election of 2020 was weird, or the election of 2000, I know for some of y'all it's like I wasn't even born then, but Bush Gore in 2000, and then what we saw in 2020, if you think those were weird, you've seen nothing till you see 1876. I'll give you this one peek. The Electoral College vote was 185 to 184. The closest vote in American history, and it was all by cheating. And there were telegrams going back and forth between the two candidates. And the telegrams essentially said, Rutherford B. Hayes, you're the Republican, you can win the election. We'll give you the electoral votes as long as you agree to withdraw the northern troops from the south.
Wow.
And Hayes agreed. He got the election. He withdrew the troops. And we are living today with the sequela of the decisions that were made in 1876. So if you choose not to vote, I go back again to start rehearsing now what you are going to tell your grandsons and granddaughters about why they have less rights than you had. Start rehearsing now so you can tell your children while they're growing up in a world that is even more racially oppressive than the ones that y'all have survived to this point. That's my pitch about voting, is that when I'm 88 and in a rocking chair and lying to my nieces and great nieces and grandnieces, they ask me about this, I don't want to lie and make shit up. Pardon my French, it's late, I'm tired. I don't want to lie and make stuff up. I want to be able to tell them, this is what I did, and what impact did it have? It had the impact that I was able to have. So do what you can do, and one thing you can do is vote. Ron DeSantis would be horrified if he thought that y'all were going to walk out of this room, talk to other students and other people in your community, and talk to them about voting. He would be horrified. So give him the night, man.
All right. You all can be giving that. Come on, give him a round of applause. Let's give him a round of applause.
We are so very, 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 very thankful for your taking the time to join us here at Edward Waters University, and we certainly have been encouraged. We've been inspired by your tremendous words and giving us the historicity around why we are where we are. And we're going to take that to heart, right, students? And we're going to make sure that we go out and do what? Vote. Vote, because voting matters. And so again, on behalf of all of us at Edward Waters University, we are just so very proud
and so very pleased and so very thankful and grateful that you joined us here this evening. And on behalf of all of us, we have a token of appreciation.
Can I just say, thank you all so much. It was an honor to be here. And the leadership of this university has said to me, if the Who We Are project is targeting the state of Florida, I want you to think about coming back and working at this university. And so y'all heard it, right? Everybody heard it. So when I come back, don't be surprised.
Thank you so very much. Thank you so very much. Let's give him another round of applause. I just want to thank everyone again for coming out this evening. Today was also our giving day. So if we have any visitors that are here today, I want to encourage you to go on to www.ewu.edu/giving and give to Edward Waters University. Your gift will certainly go a long way to supporting our students and supporting our continuous efforts to bring these kinds of speakers to our city and to our university. The last thing I wanted to share, you all heard, I think Dr. Hobbs mentioned it earlier. We do have copies of the book. So actually, Dr. Ibram Kendi was the first graduation speaker, commencement speaker, when I came to Edward Waters. So he's been here before, and we have a number of his books. It's the Definitive History of Racism in America. I think that's the title of it. And so if you want a copy of that book, we have copies, free copies here for you. You just go to the president's office and we'll make sure you get a copy. But again, thank everyone for coming out this evening. Stay woke. I think, do we have the information for our next speaker? Is it up?
It's right.
It's in the back, but it'll be on the screen.
It's in the back. Okay, our next speaker is Teslyn Figaro. If you all don't know Teslyn, she is phenomenal activist, and she will be here in October, so we're really looking forward to her. And so make sure that you come back out and be a part of that wonderful evening. All right? Thank everyone, and be safe, and we'll see you next time.